Tonight we begin a gentle journey, a long and peaceful exploration into the curious idea of Hyperborea. It is a place, or perhaps a notion, whispered in ancient texts and quiet corners of thought. We will wander through these thoughts together, slowly, without hurry. If you feel inclined, you might leave a comment, sharing the time and place you are listening. It is a comfort to know how these words are appreciated in so many ways. You are safe here. It is perfectly all right to fall asleep at any point. Indeed, that is a welcome outcome. The notion of Hyperborea speaks to us from a distant past, a whisper carried on the currents of ancient thought, telling of a land far to the north, a place shrouded in gentle mystery. It is said that this land lay beyond the reach of Boreas, the cold north wind, and thus it was called Hyperborea, the land beyond the north. This name itself seems to evoke a sense of tranquility, a place sheltered from the harshness of the world, a haven of peace. These stories that have come down to us through chroniclers and poets of old paint a picture of a realm bathed in perpetual sunlight, where the very air was mild and the earth brought forth its bounty without toil. One might wonder if such a place could truly exist, or if it represents a deeper longing within the human spirit, a yearning for a state of perfect harmony. The accounts often describe Hyperborea as an island, or perhaps a continent, situated in the far northern regions of the world, yet warmed by an unnatural or perhaps supernatural clemency. Some have suggested it was located near the Riparian Mountains, themselves a feature of mythological geography, a range that no modern explorer has ever found. Could these mountains have been a symbolic barrier rather than a physical one, marking the boundary between the known world and a realm of blissful existence? The Hyperboreans themselves, the inhabitants of this favoured land, are depicted as a race of remarkable beings. It is said they lived for 1,000 years, or perhaps even longer, their lives untouched by sickness, old age, or sorrow. They were, according to these ancient tales, a people devoted to peace, spending their days in joyful pursuits, in music, dance, and contemplation. There was no warfare among them, no strife, only a profound and abiding contentment. One might ask, how could such a society maintain its serenity for so long? What secrets did they possess? What understanding of life allowed them to exist in such a blessed state? The worship of Apollo, the god of light, music and reason, was central to the Hyperborean way of life, or so the stories tell. It is often mentioned that Apollo would spend the winter months in Hyperborea, leaving his sanctuary at Delphi to reside among this cherished people. Swans, sacred to the god, were said to draw his chariot to this northern paradise, and their song would mingle with the hymns of the Hyperboreans. This connection to a deity of light and harmony further enhances the image of Hyperborea as a place of spiritual purity and enlightenment. Could it be that their long lives and peaceful existence were a divine gift, a reward for their piety and gentle natures? The descriptions of their lives are filled with images of effortless grace. They did not labour in fields, for the land provided all they needed. They did not suffer from the inclemency of weather, for an eternal spring reigned. Their end, when it finally came after many centuries, was not one of decay or pain, but a willing departure, a joyful transition, often described as leaping from a cliff into the sea, a final act of blissful surrender. Such tales stretch the boundaries of what we consider possible, inviting us to consider if these are literal accounts, or perhaps allegories for a different kind of human experience. the location of Hyperborea remains a subject of gentle speculation, a puzzle with many missing pieces. While some ancient writers placed it north of Scythia, beyond the aforementioned Riphean mountains, others seem to suggest it was not a place that could be reached by ordinary means of travel, by ship or by land. It was perhaps a realm that existed on a different plane, or accessible only to those who were pure of heart, or perhaps it was a memory of a time when the earth itself was different. Why are there no definitive maps, no clear directions to this land of wonders? Could it be that its location was deliberately kept hidden, or that it faded from the world as the world itself changed? The gifts sent by the Hyperboreans to the temple of Apollo at Delos are a recurring motif in the ancient narratives. These offerings, wrapped in straw, were said to be passed from people to people, from nation to nation, in a long and sacred chain, until they reached their destination. This detail adds a touch of perceived reality to the legends, a connection, however tenuous, to the known world. But what were these gifts? The stories seldom specify, leaving it to our imagination. Were they objects of rare beauty, or symbols of their profound wisdom, or perhaps simply tokens of their enduring devotion? And the manner of their transmission, so indirect, so reliant on the faith of intermediaries, does it not speak of a certain elusiveness, a sacredness that could not be approached directly? One might ponder the nature of the Hyperborean knowledge. If they lived such long and harmonious lives, they must have possessed an understanding of existence that has since been lost, or perhaps remains hidden from our more troubled age. Some have speculated that they were heirs to an ancient wisdom, a primordial tradition of peace and enlightenment. Could their perpetual sunlight have been more than just a physical phenomenon? Could it have been a metaphor for an inner illumination, a state of constant spiritual awareness? These are questions that linger in the quiet spaces of thought when one considers the legacy of Hyperborea. The idea of a perfect land, a golden age, is not unique to the tales of Hyperborea. Many cultures have similar myths, stories of a time or a place where humanity lived in close communion with the divine, free from suffering and strife. Could Hyperborea be one expression of this universal archetype, a northern variant of a dream shared by all humankind? Or does its persistence in the classical imagination point to something more? Perhaps a folk memory of a real place, a real people, whose existence has been transformed by the mists of time into legend. The truth perhaps remains veiled, accessible only through intuition, or through the careful sifting of ancient whispers. It is interesting to note how these tales emphasize qualities that are often seen as ideals: longevity, peace, wisdom, and a close connection to the divine. The Hyperboreans are presented not as conquerors or builders of great empires in the material sense, but as masters of a different kind of domain, the domain of the spirit, of harmonious living. Their achievements were not measured in monuments of stone, but in the quality of their existence, in the joy and serenity that pervaded their land. Is it possible that such a focus was misunderstood by later ages, ages that valued different forms of greatness? The absence of explicit, verifiable evidence for Hyperborea has led many to dismiss it as mere fancy, a poet's dream. Yet, the very persistence of the legend, its recurrence in the writings of respected ancient authors, gives one pause. Could it be that the evidence we seek is not of the kind that can be dug from the earth, or read in unambiguous inscriptions? Perhaps the evidence is more subtle, woven into the fabric of myth, into the enduring human aspiration for a better, more peaceful world. One might wonder if the story of Hyperborea serves a purpose, a reminder of a potential that lies dormant within us, or a memory of a past that we have forgotten how to access. The climate of Hyperborea, described as eternally mild, presents a curious puzzle when juxtaposed with its supposed northern location. How could a land in the far north escape the rigours of Arctic winters? Some have sought rational explanations, proposing ancient climate shifts or unique geographical conditions. Others lean towards more esoteric interpretations, suggesting that the warmth of Hyperborea was not of terrestrial origin, but perhaps flowed from a different source, a spiritual sun, or an internal energy that permeated the land and its people. Could this land have been protected by unseen forces, by a benevolent influence that shaped its very environment? The descriptions of Hyperboreans often include their simple diet, living on the fruits of trees, and their lack of need for complex societal structures. This simplicity, this closeness to nature, is a hallmark of many depictions of the Golden Age. It suggests a life lived in accordance with natural laws, free from the artificial complexities and stresses that characterize other societies. One could ask if this simplicity was the key to their longevity and happiness. Was their wisdom rooted in an understanding of how to live in balance with the world around them and with themselves? These stories also sometimes hint at a certain innocence, or perhaps a profound understanding that transcended the need for guile or defence. They were, it is said, beloved by the gods, and this divine favour may have been their greatest protection. But what if this favour was not arbitrary? What if it was earned through their way of life, through their harmonious thoughts and actions? The narratives are not explicit, leaving these questions open to contemplation, allowing the mind to wander through the possibilities. The very name, Hyperborea, meaning beyond the north wind, carries a sense of removal, of being outside the ordinary currents of the world. Boreas, the north wind, was often depicted as a harsh and powerful deity, bringing cold and storm. To be beyond his reach was to be in a place of calm, a sanctuary. This imagery is potent, suggesting not just a geographical location, but a state of being, a spiritual refuge. Could Hyperborea have been, in essence, a state of consciousness, a way of perceiving and interacting with the world that created an environment of peace and light? It is also noted that some traditions speak of Hyperborea as the original home of certain wisdom teachings, or even of certain peoples who later migrated to other parts of the world, carrying with them fragments of this ancient heritage. These are, of course, speculations built upon the fragile foundations of myth, but they invite a certain kind of gentle inquiry. What if echoes of Hyperborean knowledge, or its influence, are still present in the world, hidden in plain sight, in symbols, in philosophies, or in unexplained ancient monuments? Who might have been the bearers of such knowledge, and how might it have been preserved or transformed over vast stretches of time? The tales often emphasize the musicality of the Hyperboreans. Their land was filled with song, with hymns to Apollo, with the music of lyres and flutes. This focus on music and harmony is significant, as music has long been associated with spiritual states, with the ordering of the cosmos, and with the soothing of the soul. Could their music have been more than mere entertainment? Could it have been a form of spiritual practice, a way of attuning themselves to the vibrations of the universe, or even a means of influencing their environment. The stories do not say, but the prominence of music in their culture is a recurring theme that invites reflection. One might also consider the role of swans in the Hyperborean mythos. These graceful birds, sacred to Apollo, were said to fly to Hyperborea, or to carry the god himself to this favoured land. Swans are often symbols of purity, beauty, and transformation. Their association with Hyperborea reinforces the image of a place that is somehow refined, elevated above the ordinary. Could the swan's flight represent a journey to a higher state of being, a journey that the Hyperboreans themselves embodied? The lack of detailed, consistent accounts across all sources is, in itself, part of the mystery. Different ancient writers offer slightly varying descriptions, adding or omitting details, creating a mosaic of impressions rather than a clear unified picture. This very ambiguity allows Hyperborea to remain a realm of the imagination, a concept that can be approached from many angles without ever being fully grasped or defined. Is it possible that this elusiveness is intentional? That the true nature of Hyperborea is meant to be contemplated rather than catalogued? Some have pondered whether Hyperborea was a physical place that vanished due to some cataclysm, or whether its disappearance was more gradual, a fading away as the world changed and humanity lost its connection to such a state of being. Or perhaps it never truly vanished, but simply withdrew from common perception, remaining accessible only to those who seek it with a particular kind of inner vision. These are questions without easy answers, questions that lead the mind down quiet pathways of speculation. The stories seem to suggest a reality that is not bound by our ordinary understanding of geography or history. The idea that the Hyperboreans were priests or servants of Apollo, dedicated to a life of sacred ritual and contemplation, is a strong thread in many narratives. This would align with their peaceful nature, their longevity, and their profound wisdom. If they were indeed a priestly race, then Hyperborea itself could be seen as a vast natural temple, a place where the divine was an immanent presence. What might their rituals have been like? What forms of worship would be practiced by a people living in perpetual light and harmony? The texts offer few specifics, allowing for a gentle wondering. The connection to Delos, a known sacred site in the ancient Greek world, through the sending of mysterious gifts, seems to ground Hyperborea, however slightly, in the world of human experience. Yet, the manner of this connection, through a long chain of intermediaries, also emphasizes its remoteness, its otherness. It is as if Hyperborea could touch the world, but only indirectly, its purity needing to be shielded from direct contact. One might ask what this says about the nature of such a blessed realm, and its relationship to other, less harmonious lands. The concept of a pole, a sacred centre, is often associated with Hyperborean lore in later interpretations. Some have envisioned it as a polar paradise, a point of stillness around which the world revolves, a place of primordial origin. This adds another layer to its mystique, connecting it to esoteric ideas about sacred geography and the spiritual axis of the earth. Could Hyperborea have been the original homeland, the point from which all life or wisdom radiated outwards? Such grand notions are, of course, speculative, but they form part of the rich tapestry of thought that has grown around this ancient name. The descriptions of the Hyperboreans choosing their own time of death a joyful leap into the sea after a long and full life, is particularly striking. It speaks of an acceptance of life cycles, a freedom from the fear of mortality that afflicts so many. This suggests a profound philosophical or spiritual attainment, an understanding that life and death are not opposites, but parts of a larger, harmonious whole. What would it be like to live with such an awareness, to face the end of physical existence not with dread, but with serene anticipation? This aspect of the myth invites deep contemplation on the nature of life itself. It is also worth noting the absence of negative qualities in the descriptions of Hyperborea. There is no mention of greed, of conflict, of despair. It is a uniformly positive portrayal, a vision of an ideal. This very perfection, of course, can lead one to question its reality. Is it too good to be true, or does it represent an ideal state that humanity once knew or could aspire to? The ancient writers who recounted these tales did not seem to present them as mere fiction, but as traditions received from an earlier time, memories of something precious. The air of Hyperborea, often described as pure and life-giving, is another element that contributes to its idyllic character. In a world where, even in ancient times, cities could be crowded and air could be less than fresh, the idea of a place with perfectly clean, invigorating air would have been particularly appealing. This detail, though simple, adds to the overall sense of a land untouched by the corruptions and pollutions of ordinary existence. Could this purity of air have contributed to their longevity and vitality? The gentle nature of the Hyperboreans, their lack of aggression or desire for conquest, sets them apart from many other peoples described in ancient histories and myths. They seem to have had no need for armies, no fear of invaders, perhaps because their land was so remote, or perhaps because they were protected by divine favour, or perhaps because their very nature radiated a harmony that disarmed any potential hostility. This peacefulness is a core element of their identity, a defining characteristic of their utopian society. One might wonder if such a state of collective serenity is achievable, or if it is destined to remain a dream. The idea that Hyperborea was a land of perpetual spring, where flowers always bloomed and trees were always laden with fruit, is a powerful image of abundance and felicity. It removes the anxieties associated with changing seasons, with the need to store provisions for winter, with the struggle for survival that characterized life in many parts of the ancient world. This constant bounty would have contributed to their carefree existence, allowing them to focus on spiritual and artistic pursuits rather than on material concerns. Could such an environment shape the very consciousness of its inhabitants, leading them towards a more elevated and joyful way of life? The question of whether Hyperborea was a literal physical place, or a symbolic representation of a spiritual state, or perhaps a combination of both, is a recurring theme in discussions about it. If it was physical, where did it go? If it was symbolic, what deeper truths does it convey? The ancient sources themselves are not always clear on this point, sometimes speaking of it in geographical terms, at other times imbuing it with qualities that seem to transcend the physical. This ambiguity is, perhaps, part of its enduring appeal, allowing each seeker to find their own meaning in the legend. The narratives often describe Hyperboreans as being long-lived, or knowing no disease or painful old age. This freedom from physical suffering is a key aspect of their blessed state. It suggests a harmony with their own bodies and with the environment that prevented the onset of illness. One could speculate that their simple diet, their joyful activities, and their peaceful minds all contributed to this remarkable health and longevity. What if the secret to such well-being lies not in complex medicines, but in a way of life that is aligned with natural and spiritual laws? The worship of Apollo, the god of light, is so central to Hyperborea that it is impossible to consider one without the other. This devotion suggests a culture that valued clarity, reason, beauty, and spiritual illumination. Apollo's presence among them, or his frequent visits, would have reinforced these values, making Hyperborea a beacon of Apollonian ideals. Could it be that the very atmosphere of the land was saturated with this divine light, influencing everything and everyone within it? The stories certainly seem to imply such a profound connection. The persistence of the Hyperborean myth across centuries, its adoption and adaptation by various writers and thinkers, speaks to its power as a symbol. Even if its literal existence cannot be proven, its existence as an idea, as an aspiration, is undeniable. It represents a longing for a world free from suffering, a world of peace, beauty, and enlightenment. And perhaps, in pondering such a world, we keep alive the possibility, however remote, of moving closer to such an ideal in our own lives, in our own times. The whispers of Hyperborea continue to resonate, inviting us to a gentle contemplation of what might be, or what might have been. The soft glow of its legend remains, a distant peaceful light in the landscape of human imagination. The chronology of Hyperborea, if such a term can be applied to a land so entwined with myth, is not a matter of fixed dates and verifiable events, but rather a slow drift through ages of unrecorded time, a sequence of gentle suppositions. It is said by some that Hyperborea existed in the earliest epochs of the world, a remnant perhaps of a primordial golden age, when the earth itself was younger and more attuned to harmonies that have since faded. One might wonder if its beginnings predate the rise of known civilizations, existing in a dawn time that left few traces for later historians to uncover. The earliest whispers of Hyperborea seem to emerge from a time when the boundaries between myth and history were less clearly defined, when poets and seers were the keepers of ancestral memories. Could it be that these first mentions were not inventions, but echoes of a genuine, albeit distant, past? Some believe that the knowledge of Hyperborea was passed down through oral traditions for generations, for centuries, before being committed to writing by the early Greek chroniclers. Why are these early accounts often so fragmentary, so elusive? Perhaps the full story was considered too sacred or too profound for common dissemination. It is thought that the initial interactions, or at least the awareness of Hyperborea by the Hellenic world, might have occurred in a very ancient period long before the classical era. Perhaps intrepid travellers, or those seeking sacred knowledge, journeyed to the far north, or encountered intermediaries who spoke of this wondrous land. Or could it be that Hyperboreans themselves in those early days occasionally ventured south, bringing with them not conquest, but whispers of their peaceful existence? The records are silent on such direct encounters, leaving a space for gentle speculation. The period often associated with the height of Hyperborean flourishing, according to some interpretations, would coincide with what might be called a mythical golden age for humanity as a whole, a time when the gods walked more closely with mortals and the world was imbued with a magic that has since receded. If Hyperborea was indeed a haven of peace and longevity, it seems fitting that it would belong to such an era. But how long did this era last? And what were the conditions that allowed it to exist? These are questions that drift like clouds in the soft sky of conjecture. There are suggestions in certain esoteric readings of myth that Hyperborea maintained its serene existence even as other parts of the world began to experience strife and the decline from that golden age. It remained perhaps an untouched sanctuary, protected by its remoteness, or by divine favour, or by the very purity of its inhabitants. One might ask, did the Hyperboreans observe the changes in the world beyond their borders? And if so, with what understanding did they view the unfolding of human history elsewhere? The legends offer no clear answers, only a sense of their profound detachment. The tradition of sending gifts to Delos, the sacred island of Apollo, seems to mark a period of interaction, however indirect, with the known Greek world. This practice, it is said, continued for some time, a thread connecting the mythical north with the historical south. When did this tradition begin? And more mysteriously, why did it eventually cease? Some say the sacred offerings were waylaid or the chain of trust broken, leading the Hyperboreans to withdraw this sign of their connection. Could this cessation mark a turning point, a gradual fading of Hyperborea from the active memory of the southern lands? One might place the accounts of figures like Abaris the Hyperborean, the legendary sage and priest of Apollo, within a somewhat later, though still ancient, time frame. Abaris was said to have travelled without eating, carrying a golden arrow, a symbol of Apollo. He was credited with great wisdom and magical abilities, such as prophecy and healing. If such figures truly came from Hyperborea, it would imply that the land still existed and was still capable of producing such remarkable individuals at a time when Greek civilization was well established. But who was Abaris truly, and what was the nature of the knowledge he bore? The stories are rich in wonder, but sparse in verifiable detail. The writings of Herodotus, in the 5th century BCE, provide one of the most notable early accounts of Hyperborea, though he himself admits he is relaying stories he has heard from others, particularly from the Scythians and the inhabitants of Delos. This suggests that by his time, Hyperborea was already a land of legend, its reality known more through hearsay and ancient tradition than through direct contemporary contact. Why did Herodotus, a careful historian for his time, choose to include these tales? Did he sense an underlying truth, or was he simply preserving the curious beliefs of the peoples he encountered? Later classical writers, such as Pliny the Elder in the 1st century CE, also mention Hyperborea, often reiterating the earlier descriptions of a blissful people living in a northern paradise. The persistence of the legend across centuries is, in itself, noteworthy. It suggests that the idea of Hyperborea held an enduring appeal, a resonance that transcended the mere repetition of old tales. But did these later writers have access to new information, or were they simply elaborating on the established lore? It is difficult to say with certainty. One might wonder if there was a period of slow decline, or a gradual withdrawal of Hyperborea from the world's awareness. If it was a physical place, perhaps changes in climate or geological shifts rendered it uninhabitable or inaccessible. If its nature was more spiritual, perhaps a shift in human consciousness made it more difficult to perceive or connect with such a realm. The stories do not speak of a sudden cataclysmic end. but rather a gentle fading, like a dream upon waking. Could it be that Hyperborea never truly vanished, but simply receded beyond the veil of ordinary perception? Some esoteric traditions propose that Hyperborea's influence did not entirely cease, but rather transformed, its wisdom being carried forward by secret societies or migrating groups who preserved fragments of its ancient heritage. This would imply a chronology not of existence and disappearance, but of transformation and hidden continuation. Who might these inheritors be, and where might this knowledge now reside? Such questions lead into realms of deep speculation, far from the shores of conventional history. The timeline of Hyperborea, therefore, is less a line and more a mist, a collection of possibilities that shimmer and change depending on the angle of contemplation. There is the supposed primordial age, the era of its flourishing. Then a period of indirect contact, marked by sacred offerings and the journeys of legendary sages. Following this, a time when it becomes a subject of historical inquiry, already veiled in legend. And finally, its absorption into the realm of esoteric thought, where its chronology becomes intertwined with vast cyclical views of time and human evolution. It is possible that the when of Hyperborea is not as important as the what, the qualities it represents, the ideals it embodies. Perhaps its timelessness is part of its essence. A place beyond the north wind might also be a place beyond the ordinary flow of time, existing in a perpetual present, or an eternal golden moment. Could its chronology be circular rather than linear, always present for those who know how to find it, or to remember it? The lack of precise dates, of archaeological evidence that can be definitively linked to Hyperborea, contributes to this sense of timelessness. It floats, unanchored, in the vast ocean of ancient belief. One might ask, if it were a real place, why are there no ruins, no artifacts that cry out its name? Or perhaps the artifacts are there, unrecognized, their true origin misunderstood. Or maybe the Hyperboreans left no material remains, their existence being so ethereal, so focused on the non-material, that they simply dissolved back into the light from which they came. Consider the possibility that different layers of the Hyperborean myth correspond to different eras or different understandings. The earliest, most purely mythological accounts might speak of a divine realm, almost outside of time. Later accounts, filtered through Greek rationalism, might attempt to place it geographically and temporally, however vaguely. And still later interpretations might re-mythologize it, seeing it as a spiritual homeland or a key to understanding humanity's distant past and future destiny. Each layer adds to the complexity and to the gentle confusion that surrounds its chronology. The stories of Hyperborean longevity, living for 1,000 years, also challenge conventional notions of time. If a generation spanned such a vast period, then their perception of history, of the passage of events, would be profoundly different from our own. What would a century or even a millennium mean to such a people? Their chronology, if they kept one, might be measured in cosmic cycles rather than in human years. This thought alone invites a slowing of the mind, a release from the urgency of our own time-bound perspectives. One might also ponder if the location of Hyperborea shifted in the telling, as geographical knowledge of the north expanded. What was once beyond the known might have been pushed further and further away as explorers charted new territories. Could this account for some of the ambiguity, Or was its location always understood to be somewhat symbolic, a sacred north that was not to be found on any mundane map? The texts themselves seem to allow for both interpretations, creating a soft focus around its place in both space and time. If Hyperborea represented an ideal state, a memory of perfection, then its chronology might be tied to the human capacity to remember or to imagine such a state. When faith in such ideals was strong, Hyperborea might have seemed more real, more accessible. As skepticism or materialism grew, it might have receded further into the realm of pure myth. In this sense, its timeline could be seen as a reflection of human consciousness itself. The end of Hyperborea, or its fading from view, is as mysterious as its beginning. There are no accounts of its conquest, its destruction by natural disaster, or its internal collapse. It simply seems to drift out of the narrative, leaving behind a lingering fragrance of peace and light. Some have suggested it was too pure, too delicate for a world that was becoming harsher and more violent. It withdrew, perhaps, to preserve its essence. But when did this withdrawal occur? Was it a gradual process, spanning centuries, or a more subtle shift, a closing of a door between worlds? The concept of sacred time, distinct from profane or ordinary time, might be relevant here. Perhaps Hyperborea existed, and continues to exist, within such a sacred time, a dimension that intersects with our own, but is not governed by the same laws of linear progression. Accessing Hyperborea, then, would not be a matter of travelling back in time, but of entering a different quality of time, a different state of being. This thought invites a departure from conventional chronological thinking into a more fluid and open understanding. The very act of recounting the Hyperborean myth, of pondering its meaning, can feel like stepping outside of ordinary time into a space of quiet contemplation. The slowness of the narratives, their repetitive and gentle nature, encourages a state of mind where the precise dating of events becomes less important than the atmosphere they evoke. The chronology becomes less a framework of facts and more a flow of impressions, a gentle stream carrying the listener towards a state of peaceful reverie. One could imagine that the Hyperboreans themselves had no need for detailed chronologies. Living in perpetual sunlight, free from the cycles of decay and renewal that mark our experience of time, their existence might have been one of continuous presence, a long unbroken song. Why would they measure what does not fundamentally change for them? Their history, if they conceived of it as such, might have been a history of subtle shifts in consciousness, of deeper understandings of the harmony that surrounded them, rather than a record of external events. The idea that knowledge from Hyperborea might have influenced later cultures, such as the Celts or other northern European peoples, introduces another layer of chronological complexity. If this were true, it would imply a transmission of wisdom across vast stretches of time, through channels that are now largely invisible to us. How would such knowledge be preserved? Through symbols, through oral traditions, through lineages of initiates? The quest to trace such influences is a journey into the mists of prehistory, where firm conclusions are elusive, but where the imagination can wander freely. Ultimately, the chronology of Hyperborea remains a beautiful enigma. It is not a history to be pinned down, but a story to be felt, to be absorbed in a state of quiet openness. Its power lies not in its factual certainty, but in its capacity to evoke a sense of wonder, a longing for a lost harmony, and a gentle invitation to consider possibilities that lie beyond the everyday. The timeline, like the land itself, is veiled, soft, and conducive to the slow drift of thought towards the borders of sleep. It is a history whispered, not proclaimed, a sequence of maybes and perhapses fading into the quiet of a long-forgotten age. As we gently consider Hyperborea, its essence seems to touch upon other whispers from the distant past, other notions of mysterious lands and forgotten wisdom. It is as if these ancient ideas resonate with one another, forming a quiet chorus of speculation, a tapestry woven with threads of myth and dream. One might wonder if Hyperborea stands alone in its legendary splendor, or if it is part of a larger interconnected web of forgotten realities. The concept of other lost civilizations, for instance, often comes to mind when contemplating Hyperborea. Tales of Atlantis, or Lemuria, or Mu, speak of advanced societies that are said to have vanished beneath the waves or succumbed to cataclysms, leaving behind only faint traces and persistent legends. Could Hyperborea have been contemporaneous with such places? Might there have been connections, perhaps exchanges of knowledge or culture, between these realms of high antiquity? The ancient texts are largely silent on such direct links, yet the imagination gently explores the possibility. If Atlantis was a maritime power, as some stories suggest, and Hyperborea a northern sanctuary, their natures might have been different, yet perhaps complementary. The idea of a primordial wisdom, an ancient science or spiritual understanding that was once common to humanity, but has since been largely lost, is another concept that seems to align with the Hyperborean myth. If the Hyperboreans lived for 1,000 years in perfect health and harmony, they must have possessed a profound knowledge of life, of the mind, and perhaps of the cosmos. Could this knowledge have been part of a global heritage, a wisdom tradition that also found expression in other advanced cultures of a distant past, cultures whose names are now only whispered? One might ponder if fragments of this universal wisdom survived the passage of ages, perhaps preserved in esoteric teachings or encoded in sacred symbols around the world. Ley lines, those subtle pathways of telluric energy that some believe crisscrossed the globe, connecting sacred sites and ancient monuments, also offer a potential, if speculative, connection. If Hyperborea was a place of immense spiritual power, a focal point of benevolent energies, could it have been a major node in such a global network? Perhaps its location, though unknown to us, was determined by these natural energy currents, or perhaps the Hyperboreans themselves understood how to work with these energies to maintain the sanctity and harmony of their land. Who is to say what subtle forces were understood and utilized by peoples of such profound attunement? The lines on ancient maps sometimes seem to hint at more than just geography. Perhaps they trace pathways of forgotten significance. The notion of a polar tradition, a spiritual center at the Earth's northern pole, has been explored by various mystics and writers. Hyperborea, with its northern location and its association with light and enlightenment, fits comfortably within such a framework. Could it have been the terrestrial reflection of a celestial pole, a point where heaven and earth met, a place of origin or revelation? This idea connects Hyperborea to grand cosmological schemes, suggesting it was more than just a remote paradise, but a crucial point in the spiritual geography of the planet. One might wonder if other sacred sites around the world were oriented towards this northern spiritual pole, drawing their sanctity from it. The relationship between Hyperborea and the gods, particularly Apollo, is central. But one could also ask if there were connections to other divine pantheons, or if the Hyperborean understanding of the divine was unique. The ancient world was rich in stories of gods interacting with mortals, of divine lineages and sacred dispensations. Could the Hyperboreans have been part of a wider celestial order, known perhaps by different names in different cultures, yet recognized for their special connection to the sources of light and wisdom? The myths of many cultures speak of culture heroes or divine instructors who brought knowledge to humanity in a distant past. Perhaps some of these figures had origins or connections that led back to the serene realms of Hyperborea. The concept of cyclical time, prevalent in many ancient philosophies, also seems to resonate with the Hyperborean legend. If history moves in vast cycles of ages, golden, silver, bronze, and iron, then Hyperborea might represent the peak of a previous golden age, a time of unparalleled perfection. Its fading from view could correspond to the descent into a darker age. But if time is cyclical, then perhaps such a golden age, and such a land as Hyperborea, is not lost forever, but destined to return when the great wheel of time turns once more. This thought offers a gentle sense of hope, a possibility that the harmony of Hyperborea is not merely a lost memory but also a future potential. One might also consider the possibility of ancient migrations. If Hyperborea was a real place, did its inhabitants remain forever isolated, or did some of them, at various times, journey outwards, carrying with them their knowledge and their gentle ways? Some have speculated that certain ancient peoples, known for their wisdom or their artistic skills, might have been descendants of Hyperborean émigrés, or at least influenced by their teachings. The Celtic Druids, with their reverence for nature and their sophisticated astronomical knowledge, are sometimes mentioned in this context. Or perhaps traces of Hyperborean influence can be found in the shamanic traditions of northern peoples. These are, of course, faint echoes, possibilities that drift on the winds of speculation. The idea of lost technologies is often associated with vanished civilizations like Atlantis, while Hyperborea is more often depicted as a place of spiritual rather than material advancement. One might still wonder if they possessed forms of knowledge that could be considered a kind of technology, perhaps technologies of consciousness, or subtle energy manipulation, or methods of harmonizing with natural forces. Could their perpetual sunlight, their effortless abundance, have been maintained through such refined understanding, rather than by purely supernatural means? The distinction between magic and highly advanced, subtle science can sometimes be blurred, especially when looking back across vast gulfs of time. The stories of sacred islands, places of initiation and retreat, found in many cultures, also bear a certain resemblance to the Hyperborean ideal. Islands like Avalon, or Dilmun, or Shambhala in some interpretations are described as earthly paradises, homes of sages and immortals, difficult to find and accessible only to the worthy. Could these be different cultural memories of a similar phenomenon, or perhaps sister realms to Hyperborea, each preserving a spark of primordial light in different corners of the world, or in different dimensions of reality? The parallels are intriguing, suggesting a shared human intuition about such blessed and hidden places. The concept of a world tree or axis mundi, a central pillar connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld, is another powerful symbol found in many mythologies. If Hyperborea was located at a spiritual pole, it might have been seen as the terrestrial location of such an axis. This would make it a place of immense cosmic significance, a conduit for divine energies, and a point of stability for the entire world. One might wonder if the Hyperboreans were the guardians of this sacred centre, their lives dedicated to maintaining its integrity and its connection to the higher realms. Such a role would certainly explain their profound peace and their favoured status. The descriptions of the Hyperboreans as a musical people, their land filled with song and harmony, also connect to broader philosophical ideas about the music of the spheres, the ancient belief that the universe is ordered by harmonious mathematical and musical principles. Could the Hyperboreans have lived in conscious attunement to this cosmic music, their society and their environment reflecting its perfect proportions? Their devotion to Apollo, god of music, would certainly support such an interpretation. Perhaps their way of life was a living embodiment of this universal harmony, a symphony of peace and light. The recurring motif of gifts, of sacred offerings being sent from Hyperborea to Delos, passed from hand to hand across great distances, speaks of a network, a chain of connection, however tenuous. This implies relationships, understandings, and perhaps even treaties or sacred pacts between different peoples, all centered around the reverence for Apollo and the mysterious sanctity of Hyperborea. Who were these intermediaries? What did they understand of the source of these gifts? The details are lost, but the image of this sacred relay suggests a world more interconnected in spiritual ways than our histories often portray. One could also draw gentle parallels between the descriptions of Hyperborea and the Garden of Eden, or other primordial paradises described in religious texts. The themes of innocence, abundance, longevity, and close communion with the divine are common. While the specific narratives differ, the underlying aspiration for a state of original perfection seems to be a universal human trait. Could Hyperborea be the Hellenic iteration of this archetype? A specific cultural memory of a time before the world grew old and complicated? The similarities are soft, but they invite a quiet contemplation of shared human dreams. The idea of hollow earth theories, or subterranean realms, though often considered fringe, sometimes intersects with legends of northern paradises. Some interpretations have suggested that Hyperborea might not have been on the surface of the far north, but perhaps within it, or accessible through polar openings. These are, of course, highly speculative notions, far removed from the classical accounts, yet they represent later attempts to locate or explain the enduring mystery of this land. They show how the idea of Hyperborea continues to evolve, attracting new layers of interpretation and new connections to other esoteric concepts. The gentle wisdom attributed to the Hyperboreans, their peacefulness and detachment, might also be compared to the ideals of some Eastern philosophies, such as Taoism or certain schools of Buddhism, which emphasize harmony with nature, non-striving, and the cultivation of inner peace. Could there be ancient, forgotten links between these traditions, or do they simply represent independent discoveries of universal truths? The possibility of a shared spiritual ancestry for humanity, a primordial wisdom that branched out in different directions, is a thought that often arises when contemplating such profound similarities across cultures. Hyperborea, in this context, might be seen as one of the earliest and purest expressions of this inherent human capacity for enlightenment. The very elusiveness of Hyperborea, its lack of a fixed place on modern maps, has allowed it to become a symbol for any idealized or utopian vision. It can represent a spiritual goal, a state of consciousness to be attained, or a dream of a better future for humanity. In this sense, its relations are not just with other ancient myths, but with all human aspirations for peace, wisdom, and harmony. It connects to the poet's dream, the philosopher's quest, and the mystic's vision. The repetition of certain themes in the Hyperborean legend, light, music, longevity, peace, divine favour, creates a strong, coherent image, even amidst the vagueness of detail. These core qualities are what allow it to resonate with other, similarly themed ideas. It is as if there is a certain frequency of peaceful perfection that these various myths and concepts are tuned into, and Hyperborea is a particularly clear and sustained note in that ancient song. One might wonder if by contemplating these connections, by allowing the mind to drift between these related ideas, we can begin to sense the underlying harmony that they all point towards. The way Hyperborea is often described as being beyond something, beyond the north wind, beyond the Rhipaean mountains, beyond the reach of ordinary travel, also suggests a relationship of transcendence. It is not just another land among lands, but a realm that exists on a higher or more refined level of being. This quality of transcendence links it to all concepts of sacred or hidden realms, places that are not easily accessed but hold great spiritual power or promise. The journey to such places is often depicted as an inner one, as much as a physical one. The silence of Hyperborea on matters of empire, of conquest, of worldly power is also significant in its relations to other legendary lands. While Atlantis is sometimes depicted with advanced technologies that could be used for power, Hyperborea's strength seems to lie entirely in its peacefulness, its spiritual attainment. This sets it apart and perhaps above visions of utopia that rely on material might. Its power is the power of attraction, the power of inspiration, not the power of coercion. This gentle strength is a recurring theme when considering its possible influence or connections. As we explore these soft connections, these gentle resonances between Hyperborea and other mysterious concepts, it becomes clear that it is not an isolated fancy, but part of a vast, interconnected landscape of human imagination and spiritual seeking. Each idea casts a soft light on the others, creating a complex interplay of echoes and reflections, a sense of a deeper, hidden pattern that underlies the surface of history and myth. The mind is invited to wander through these connections, slowly, peacefully, finding new pathways of gentle speculation, new ways to ponder the enduring mystery of this northern sanctuary. The relations are not chains of logic, but threads of gossamer, luminous in the quiet twilight of ancient memory. And so, our gentle exploration of Hyperborea draws towards a soft conclusion, though perhaps conclusion is too firm a word for a subject so veiled in mist and ancient whispers. We have wandered through its descriptions, considered its possible timeline, and touched upon its potential connections to other enduring mysteries. What remains is not a set of answers, but a lingering sense of wonder, a quiet contemplation of possibilities that drift just beyond the reach of certainty. It is said by some that Hyperborea was a real place, a geographical location in the far north, warmed by an inexplicable clemency, inhabited by a people of remarkable longevity and peace. If this were so, one might wonder why its traces are now so thoroughly hidden. Could it be that the earth itself has changed, that coastlines have shifted, that mountains have risen and fallen, obscuring what once was? Or perhaps its location was always intended to be elusive, accessible only to those who approached with a certain purity of spirit? The lack of definitive maps, the reliance on second-hand accounts, all contribute to this sense of a place that perhaps chose not to be found by ordinary means. Others believe that Hyperborea represents not a physical land, but a spiritual state, an ideal of human existence, a golden age of consciousness. In this view, its perpetual sunlight would be the light of inner illumination, its effortless abundance the fruit of a harmonious mind, its longevity the result of a life lived in perfect accord with natural and divine law. Could it be that the stories of Hyperborea are allegories, guiding us towards a potential that lies dormant within the human soul? A reminder of what humanity could be if it were to embrace peace, wisdom, and a deep connection to the sacred. One might ponder if this inner Hyperborea can still be sought, still be cultivated, even in a world that seems so far removed from such ideals. Then there is the thought that Hyperborea was perhaps both a place and a state, a realm where the physical and the spiritual were so perfectly intertwined that they became indistinguishable, a land whose very environment reflected the purity and enlightenment of its inhabitants. If such a place existed, its influence might have been profound, a beacon of harmony in a nascent world, and its fading from view could be seen as a great loss, or perhaps a necessary withdrawal, preserving its essence until a time when the world might be more receptive to its gentle wisdom. The question of its chronology remains soft and open. Did it exist in a remote dawn time, a primordial paradise? Or was its influence felt in later ages, through sages and teachings that carried its light into other cultures? The very idea of a people living for 1,000 years stretches our conventional understanding of time, suggesting a different rhythm of existence, a different perception of history. Perhaps its true timeline is not linear but cyclical or even eternal, existing in a dimension of sacred time that intersects with our own in mysterious ways. Why are there no firm dates, no unambiguous records? Perhaps because its story is not meant to be confined by the limitations of ordinary historical accounting. Its relations to other myths and mysteries also remain a field for gentle speculation. Was it connected to Atlantis or Lemuria? Did its wisdom influence the Druids or the sages of the East? Were ley lines its pathways of energy and the pole star its celestial guide? These are questions that invite the mind to weave connections, to see patterns, to sense a larger hidden coherence in the tapestry of ancient belief. Could this knowledge, this Hyperborean influence, have come from the stars, as some quietly suggest? Or was it an indigenous wisdom, born from the very heart of the earth? The figures associated with Hyperborea, like Abaris with his golden arrow, or the unnamed maidens who carried sacred gifts to Delos, add a human touch to the legend, yet they too are shrouded in mystery. Who were they, truly? What messages did they bear? Their stories are like fragments of a beautiful broken mosaic, hinting at a larger picture that we can only partially glimpse. One might wonder what knowledge they possessed, what secrets they guarded. Ultimately, Hyperborea offers no firm conclusions, only fading hypotheses, gentle suppositions that drift like mist over a serene landscape. It remains a symbol of peace, of light, of longevity, of a harmonious existence that seems almost too perfect for our troubled world. And yet, the persistence of its legend, the way it has captivated thinkers and dreamers for millennia, suggests that it touches upon a deep human longing, an enduring aspiration for something more, something purer, something truer. Perhaps the value of Hyperborea lies not in proving its existence, but in contemplating its possibility. In allowing ourselves to imagine such a realm, we open a space within our minds for peace, for wonder, for a gentle release from the demands of the everyday. The stories of Hyperborea are like a soft lullaby from a distant past, soothing the intellect and inviting the spirit to rest. It is said that the Hyperboreans, at the end of their long and joyful lives, would willingly leap into the sea, a final act of blissful surrender. This image, so serene, so accepting, offers a final point of contemplation. What understanding of life and death would lead to such a departure? It speaks of a profound trust in the cosmos, a sense of completion, emerging back into the source from which all life arises. As our journey through these thoughts comes to a close, the land of Hyperborea seems to recede once more into the gentle mists of legend. It remains a quiet question, a soft whisper in the corridors of time. One might wonder if its light still shines, somewhere beyond our knowing, a peaceful beacon in the vastness of what was and what might yet be. The answers, if they exist, are not for us to grasp tonight, but perhaps to dream upon, as we too drift towards a place of quiet rest. The echoes of its music, the vision of its perpetual spring, the sense of its profound peace, these may linger, a gentle comfort as the night deepens. It is okay to let these thoughts fade now, to allow the mind to become still, like a calm northern sea reflecting a soft, distant light.